Dear Scorpio, in moments that are very quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear a clock ticking or the wind slipping through a narrow crack in the door, Scorpio often notices more than what appears on the surface, not because someone just said something important, not because there's a clear sign pointing the way. It's simply that, in that stillness, something very subtle brushes against the inside. It might be late at night, a warm yellow light falling across a small room. The day seems finished, neatly closed, and yet a thought rises on its own, uninvited. Scorpio has moments like this often, not loud, not dramatic, just a very light feeling, like standing at a familiar crossroads and suddenly sensing it might be worth pausing a little longer. Watching Scorpio in everyday life, and it's easy to notice they're not the type to react right away. They listen, but not only to words. They listen to the spaces between sentences, to the hesitation in someone's eyes, to the things people aren't even sure they've said yet, as if inside those small details, another story is quietly unfolding. Sometimes, even Scorpio can't quite explain why they feel what they feel, why an ordinary conversation leaves a sense of something unfinished, why, when everything seems fine on the surface, there's still a faint unease underneath. Instead of pushing it away, Scorpio tends to keep that feeling close, setting it aside, like placing a small flame in the corner of a room to warm the space when it's needed. Perhaps Scorpio's intuition isn't always crystal clear. It's more like a road hidden by early morning fog. So you can't see the whole path, but you can sense the direction. And that feeling often arrives when Scorpio allows themselves to slow down, when there's no need to prove anything, no rush to reach an answer, just being present with the moment as it passes. People who know Scorpio well sometimes say they see through others, but if you ask Scorpio, they might just smile softly. To them, it's not about seeing through anyone. It's about being comfortable sitting in silence long enough to notice very small things. Like sitting in a dark room. At first, you see nothing, but the longer you stay, the more your eyes adjust. In daily life, this ability doesn't always make things easier. At times, it causes Scorpio to think more than necessary. Yet there are moments when listening to what isn't said helps them avoid rushed decisions. You're reminding them that not every answer needs to arrive right away. And maybe, at a deeper level, this kind of listening isn't only for others. Scorpio is also learning to listen to themselves, to feelings that don't yet have names, to desires that are still unclear, to the parts they once overlooked while being too busy with the outside world. In a life that's always moving, the ability to stop and listen to what isn't spoken may not offer complete certainty. But for Scorpio, it becomes a way of not losing direction, a very personal, very quiet way, and deep enough to stay with them through the longer stretches of the road ahead. Along those longer stretches of the road, intuition doesn't arrive like a sudden flash of magic. It shows up much more quietly. Like the habit of slowing your steps while crossing an empty street, or the unconscious glance up at the sky before turning into a familiar alley. Scorpio seems to gather their awareness that way, little by little without needing to name it. There are conversations that feel completely ordinary, talk about work, about life, the kinds of things everyone talks about. And yet, Scorpio notices something shift, a change in someone's breathing, a pause that lasts just a second longer than expected, a smile that arrives a moment too late. Those small details don't lead to immediate conclusions. They're simply held onto, like slipping a few pebbles into a pocket during a long walk. Over time, those pebbles begin to carry weight, not heavy enough to pull them down, but enough to remind them that some things deserve deeper reflection. Why Scorpio learns to trust that feeling not because it's always right, but because it reflects the attention they've given to people and to the moments they've lived through. That attention, over the years, quietly turns into a kind of inner map. In everyday life, Scorpio doesn't always want to analyze or dig deep. Some days they simply observe. like sitting in a cafe, watching people pass by the window. No effort to figure out what anyone is carrying, just watching. And somehow, it's that lack of urgency that allows many things to become clearer on their own. At times, intuition is shaped by experiences that weren't easy, trusting the wrong moment, ignoring an early feeling, and later realizing an important signal was missed. Those moments aren't dramatic, but they leave a quiet echo that lingers. The Scorpio doesn't often talk about them, but they remember, and that memory subtly adjusts the way they observe the world going forward. Because of this, Scorpio's intuition rarely feels impulsive. It doesn't demand immediate action. It's more like a small flame held in the hand, warm enough to light the way, but not blazing so fiercely that it burns everything around it. They tend to wait one more beat, to look one more time, to see whether that first feeling is still there. Looking back, many of Scorpio's life choices don't come from a single decisive moment. They come from a long process of accumulation. Looks that were noticed, words that were heard, silences that were remembered. All of it blends together into an overall sense, not clear enough to explain in neat sentences, but steady enough to place the next step with confidence. And when the world grows too loud, too fast, it's this quiet way of observing that helps Scorpio keep their own rhythm, not to withdraw from life, but to avoid being swept away by it. So when a choice is needed, they don't rely only on logic or passing emotion. They also lean on something that's been patiently nurtured over time, an intuition shaped by listening, by stillness, and by many moments of standing quietly in place before moving forward again. Those moments of standing still aren't always comfortable. Sometimes they arrive late at night, after coming home later than planned, when the room is lit only by a small lamp, just enough light for one corner of the desk. Outside, everything keeps moving. Cars pass, lights change, life goes on. But inside, it can feel as if time has slowed down. Scorpio often finds themselves in moments like this, facing inward more than facing the world. When they spend enough time observing others, Scorpio begins to notice something quietly fascinating. Every emotion they sense in someone else, defensiveness, the fear of being left behind, the desire to be understood, seems to awaken a reflection within. It isn't always clear right away. Sometimes it takes a long conversation or a stretch of shared silence before a question gently rises to the surface. There are moments when Scorpio is surprised by their own reactions. A sentence that sounds harmless suddenly causes them to pause. A small gesture from someone else leaves an echo that lingers longer than expected. These moments don't push them toward quick conclusions, or they simply open a door, just enough to glimpse a side of themselves they hadn't noticed before. For Scorpio, empathy isn't only about stepping into someone else's shoes, it's also about accepting that they carry similarly layered emotions within. There are parts of their inner world they once believed they understood, only to discover there were deeper layers still untouched. And instead of rushing to analyze or fix those parts, Scorpio often chooses to sit with the feeling a little longer. It might happen while sitting alone in a familiar cafe, watching people drift past the window, or while walking down a quiet street, listening to the steady rhythm of their own footsteps. In these very ordinary moments, questions arise naturally, not sharply, not demanding answers right away. Just a gentle curiosity about who they are becoming. Over time, Scorpio comes to realize that understanding others deeply requires an equally deep understanding of themselves. Without that balance, what they absorb from the outside world can easily become too heavy. Turning inward helps them stay centered, not dissolving into other people's emotions, but also not building cold distance. And somewhere along the way, a very quiet kind of maturity begins to form. Not the feeling of having everything figured out, but the acceptance that parts of the self are still unfolding. Scorpio grows more comfortable leaving some questions open without rushing to close them. because it's this openness that makes the journey feel lighter and more honest as they continue walking forward along their own path. When that path doesn't always appear clearly. Some stretches are wrapped in early morning fog, the ground still damp, footprints easy to erase. Scorpio often pauses at places like that, not from a lack of courage, but from a habit of feeling the ground beneath them before placing their weight down. Standing still for a moment, listening to their own breathing, noticing what emotion is saying, what reason is quietly whispering, and whether there's something vague, not yet named, lingering in between. When emotions rise, Scorpio rarely makes a choice right away. They let the wave pass. They let the noise settle. Like a small flame that needs time to steady before it doesn't flare too high, they wait for the inner temperature to return to its familiar rhythm. It might happen during a sleepless night, when a desk lamp casting light onto a blank page, or early in the morning when the city hasn't fully woken yet. Those moments become space for weighing things quietly. Scorpio's way of considering doesn't move in a straight line. It loops through old memories, brushes against experiences that once left marks, then returns to the present with a slightly altered view. They remember earlier moments of rushing, decisions made in an instant, the echoes that followed afterward. Not to blame themselves, but to understand why this time a slower pace feels necessary. Some decisions seem small on the surface, a meeting postponed, a sentence left unsaid, a door not opened right away. But for Scorpio, those small choices often carry long-term weight. They shape how a relationship continues, how a career path quietly shifts, or how Scorpio treats themselves in the days that follow. The weight isn't in the moment of choosing, but in the quiet chain of effects that comes after. Once a step is taken, Scorpio rarely looks back with hesitation. Not because they believe they're always right, but because they know that choice was placed down only after many layers of feeling and thought had been given room to speak. There's a calmness in the way they move forward, like someone who has carefully checked their pack before a long journey, knowing it holds what's needed, even if the road ahead remains uncertain. At times, Scorpio's silence can be hard for others to read, but within that silence, a map is quietly being drawn. Not with sharp lines, but with sensation, with memory, with moments of standing still long enough to know where they truly are. And when the path opens, even if it isn't spectacular, it carries a quiet sense of reliability. Enough for Scorpio to step forward, accept the weight of the choice, and continue walking at their own rhythm. That rhythm doesn't always match the pace of the outside world. Sometimes it moves a little slower, sometimes it pauses right in the middle, like standing beneath an awning, waiting for the rain to pass. Scorpio is familiar with this. They understand that not every step needs to be seen right away. Some choices only need to be placed in the right spot and then allowed to settle, while time quietly does the rest. In the way Scorpio approaches life, strategy rarely looks like control. It feels more like reading a map under dim light, not illuminating every corner, but offering just enough clarity to recognize the main direction, knowing when to step forward and when to stay still and listen a little longer. Like sitting in a quiet room late at night, the lamp warm enough to see your own hands, but not bright enough to expose everything at once. There are doors that look tempting, doors that seem ready to open. And yet, Scorpio often doesn't rush, not out of fear, but because they sense the timing isn't right. That feeling arrives softly, like a small flame not yet steady enough to hold against the wind. So they wait, they watch, they see what remains after the first wave of excitement fades. In relationships, this way of moving becomes even clearer. Scorpio doesn't try to lead or push. They listen to how someone enters shared space, and they notice the rhythm of conversation, the way silence appears between two people. Little details begin to form a picture. No need for conclusions, no need for labels, just enough understanding to know where they belong. Sometimes that understanding comes from choosing not to act at all, not sending another message, not adding one more explanation, allowing things to reveal themselves in their own timing. Scorpio learns that the harder something is held, the easier it can slip away. And when space is allowed to exist, many answers find their way in quietly. In everyday life, Scorpio's strategy can look very simple: waking up a bit earlier than usual, walking down a street that's still empty, turning off a few lights at night, sitting quietly with their own thoughts. These moments don't feel powerful, but they bring clarity, a kind of clarity that doesn't ask to be explained. Maybe that's why Scorpio rarely chases someone else's rhythm. They sense that everyone has their own time to understand, to choose, to let go. And their task is simply to keep the inner flame alive, not letting it go out and not letting it burn too fiercely, to keep intuition sensitive enough to recognize when it's time to move forward and when it's better to wait one more round. Over time, this way of living doesn't make life easier, but it makes it feel more real. Scorpio slowly comes to see that the deepest form of strategy is sometimes just understanding. Understanding the moment, understanding people, and most of all, understanding themselves. So that each step, even a small one, carries the feeling of having been chosen with care. And the road ahead opens in a rhythm that is quiet, distinctly their own, and steady enough to keep going. That steadiness sometimes shows itself through very long stretches of silence. Not the tense kind of silence, but a silence with weight, like when the lights in a room are dimmed and every sound seems to soften at once. Scorpio is familiar with spaces like that. They don't see silence as an emptiness that needs to be filled, but as a place where things can quietly rearrange themselves. There are moments in conversation when Scorpio pauses right as someone is waiting for a response, not because there's nothing to say. Quite the opposite. Too much is present all at once, and they sense that speaking too soon might thin out the truth of the feeling, or shift the moment into something else entirely. So they hold it, they let it rest, like placing a small flame in the palm of the hand without gripping too tightly. For Scorpio, silence doesn't mean distance. It's more like sitting beside someone late at night, no words exchanged, yet the sense of connection remains. Some relationships are sustained by that quiet presence. No need for grand promises, no need for long explanations. Just a shared trust that timing will eventually speak for itself. In everyday life, choosing silence at the right moment can help Scorpio avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. They come to understand that not every thought needs to be shared the instant it appears. Some emotions need time to settle, to find their own shape before the right language emerges. And some things, when left unsaid, remain whole for much longer. It might look like a message never sent, a phone call postponed, an explanation held overnight. Small choices like these rarely draw attention, but over time, they create a rhythm of their own. A rhythm that allows Scorpio to watch their own reactions unfold, to see what truly matters and what is only a passing impulse. In extended silence, Scorpio also hears their inner voice more clearly. Thoughts once drowned out by outside noise begin to surface. Sometimes it's fatigue, sometimes the quiet wish for change, sometimes simply the need to rest. Silence doesn't bring immediate answers, but it creates space where questions can exist without being rushed. And when Scorpio does choose to speak, their words tend to carry the weight of careful consideration. Not many, not forceful, just precise enough to touch what truly matters, because they understand that the power of words isn't found in how many are spoken, but in when they arrive. Like a small flame in the night, it doesn't need to blaze to prove anything, only to be warm enough to light the way, and calm enough to keep everything from burning too fast. Within that stillness, changes begin to take shape in ways that are hard to notice from the outside. There are no clear signs, no announcing moment. Just a morning where you wake up and something familiar feels slightly different. An old habit no longer brings the same comfort. A thought once repeated again and again suddenly doesn't carry the same weight. Scorpio often moves through changes like this in silence. On the outside, everything appears the same. Work continues, conversations carry on. But inside, a cycle has quietly come to an end, like a door closing without a sound. Not because that door was wrong, but because it had finished what it came to do. Some changes begin by letting go of a familiar reaction, no longer needing to stay guarded in situations that once made the heart race, no longer explaining so much just to be understood. Small shifts, when added together, create a turn in direction. Not dramatic, but enough to make the road ahead feel different. In moments like these, intuition acts as a quiet guide. It doesn't command, it doesn't push, it simply suggests. Like a dim light in a long hallway, not illuminating the entire path, but offering just enough clarity to know which direction you're moving toward. Scorpio learns to trust these subtle signals, not because they're always right, but because they feel honest to what's being sensed inside. At times, change comes from stepping away from something once deeply familiar, a relationship, a way of thinking, an older version of the self. There's no formal goodbye, just a gradual thinning of presence, a loosening of attachment. And within that space, Scorpio notices something simple. Breathing feels easier. These quiet shifts rarely bring immediate excitement. What they offer instead is steadiness, a kind of relief that's hard to name, like clearing out a room that hasn't been opened in a long time. Not everything is new, but the air feels lighter. Scorpio doesn't rush to fill the space that appears. They let it remain for a while, watching what might want to enter next. Over time, decisions placed down in silence begin to shape a different way of living. No need to prove anything. No need for outside validation. Just an inner sense that the direction feels right for this moment. And perhaps it's that quiet approach that allows these changes to last, not swept away by passing turbulence, but deep enough to stay and light enough to keep adjusting when adjustment is needed. Looking back, what Scorpio carries from that journey isn't a set of clear answers to everything. Sometimes it's simply a familiar feeling, standing still in a quiet room, late night light resting on the floor, and realizing something inside has shifted. Not much, just a little, but enough to know that the inner layers have been touched and truly listened to. This way of living may not make life easier, but it creates the breathing room that's needed, room to pause instead of reacting to everything right away. Room to change a thought, to change direction, without feeling like something important has been betrayed. In those quiet spaces, Scorpio slowly learns how to stay with their own emotions, even when those emotions don't yet have clear names. There are very late nights when the city has grown quieter, and Scorpio sits alone, thinking about choices already made. Not to judge them as right or wrong, but to sense where they've led. What has stayed? What has been released? And perhaps it's that gentle way of looking back that makes the road ahead feel less frightening. Intuition, after all, isn't something that leads to a fixed destination. It's more like a quiet companion, one that reminds you when it's time to slow down, when it's time to stand still, and when it's possible to move forward again. Even strategic decisions don't always look important on the surface. Sometimes they're as simple as choosing not to repeat a familiar cycle, or allowing yourself to follow a slightly different feeling than before. In a fast world filled with noise and constant demands, living more deeply with yourself can seem like a quiet choice. But within that quiet, many things are being rearranged. Like a room after the lights are dimmed, nothing disappears, it simply becomes clearer in a different way. And maybe, at some point, everyone finds themselves standing still like that. A moment where nothing needs to be decided yet. Nothing needs to be fully understood. Just listening for what, right now, is truly still present inside. When you think about the times you slowed down enough to hear yourself, does that feeling remain with you? The story settles here, very gently, like a small light still glowing in the night, not meant to guide anyone else, but just enough to warm the one who stays, and to be carried quietly into the next stretches of their own life.